You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke McKenna, but today's case is about the Brighton trunk murders. Now, you may be thinking serial killer. However, these cases would happen many years apart. And although there are very strange circumstances in both of them, they all have one thing in common: the trunk. Now, that combined with the confession made years later and a Jane Doe made this the perfect case for ODDtober. And if you don't know what that is, it is my new series here on this channel where I'm going to be posting the strangest content all throughout October, and there's going to be so much for you to consume this month. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, then make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss any of it. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 1831 in England, and the Holloways were a young couple living in Brighton. They were Celia and John, and they had met in the 20s at a race course. Now, Celia was 6 years older than John at the time, but instantly became infatuated with this bad boy type, and she really fell for him. However, John didn't necessarily feel the same, although that wouldn't stop him from seeing Celia over and over again. This would result in a pregnancy, one that he couldn't care less about. And at this point, Celia, who was working at a tavern, was actually fired by her boss, who found out she was pregnant. And John was working odd jobs at the time, but he didn't have an abundance of money either. However, he still refused to marry Celia, even though she was having his baby. And at this point, Celia had no choice but to get help in the money department, because it was very hard for her to get a job at this time being pregnant. It wasn't like it is today where it's taboo to fire a pregnant woman. It was just a free-for-all. They could do whatever they wanted. And so Celia had to go to parish relief for help, which is, from what I gathered, basically like welfare here in the States. And she had to ask them for help, and when she was explaining why, she had to say that John wouldn't marry her. And that is when they went after John and forced him to. They actually arrested John, sent him to Lewes prison, and told him that if he didn't agree to marrying Celia, he would not be released. And it took him 5 weeks to agree to marry her, even while he was in prison. Unfortunately, shortly after the baby was born, or even possibly as the baby was born, it passed away. I read that it was a stillborn. I also read that it was a miscarriage, but either way, it did not survive, unfortunately. And of course, because John had married Celia only because of the baby, he was very angered by this. But shortly after, Celia did become pregnant again with a baby named Agnes. However, this baby would only live till about 1. On August 31st of 1831, a local fisherman would be walking down an area that was known as Lover's Walk at Preston Park when he would find a trunk. Around this trunk was bloodied clothing, and inside was a body missing the head and arms. Everyone knew who this was instantly, because she was said to be only 4 feet 3 inches, and someone so small in the area could only point to one woman. You see, after the loss of their second child, John would go out to sea and meet a woman named Anne Kennett, and they would illegally marry while John was still married to Celia. And at this point, John and Anne would live together under the name as Mr. and Mrs. Goldsmith, and by the summer of 1831, both of these women that were married to John would become pregnant by him. At this point, John wanted nothing to do with Celia once again, and she had to go back to the parish relief and demand maintenance from him, which was of 2 shillings per week. And John was very angered by this because he didn't have much money himself, and now he was supporting 2 pregnant women. At the time, Celia thankfully had a great friend named Miss Simmons who allowed her to live with her while she couldn't work anywhere, but she did demand these 2 shillings of John to survive. Now her body was in a trunk, and everyone had a prime suspect in mind already. And according to the Mens Rea podcast, this body that was in this trunk, which turned out to be Celia, was put on display at a local barn where people actually paid money to go and see it. Ann Kennett was arrested first as they couldn't find John Holloway after this body was found. They searched everywhere and eventually he would walk into the police station because he had heard that they were looking for him. He also said he had nothing to do with it. However, Celia's friend, Miss Simmons, that she'd been living with, told police that about a month before she had been found was the last time Miss Simmons had seen her because John had come to pick her up, claiming that he wanted to live with her once again, and she willingly went. However, Miss Simmons also said that on several occasions John would threaten Celia. Throughout this, John kept saying that he believed that Celia was in London this whole time, that he had no idea where she had went, and then suddenly he changed his mind. He was finally going to tell the truth. He then explained how in July, 3 weeks prior, he had called her up at Miss Simmons' house and told her to pack her belongings. Then on July 14th, he would go pick them up, take them to the house that he had bought for the two of them, or so he said, and then he would go back to get Celia from the house. He would end up taking her to a property at number 11 North Stein Row. He began to tell her he was sick of the life he was currently living. He only wanted to live with her. He wanted it to be how it originally was between the two of them, and of course she believed him. John hugged her and she hugged him back, believing that her life was finally coming back together again. However, this happiness and life itself would cease at this moment as John put the cord around her neck and tightened it. After he had strangled her, he then cut her throat twice and drug her to the cupboard. He then attached this rope to the nail on the wall and left her there to make sure she was really dead. He said he did this all alone with no help, not even from Anne. John claimed that he went back the next day after burning all of her belongings and cut her down from this rope. Then he proceeded to cut off her head and her arms, put them in a bag, and put the rest of her body in something that she had brought with her, her very own trunk. He said he then took the trunk in a wheelbarrow and disposed of her. And when examining her body, the coroner said that she had been amputated with skill. And John had once worked as the butcher's boy. Now, Celia's head and limbs were found in a privy on Margaret Street, and this is where John lived at the time. John said that after killing Celia, he believed that his unborn baby that was inside of her might still be alive, yet he did nothing about it. Anne had been acquitted due to the belief that no woman could commit a murder, and then on December 16th, John made his final confession after being found guilty right before he would be hanged, and he said, "I, unknown to Celia, passed the cord round her neck. It was then some minutes before I pulled it tight. At last I lost all natural feelings and pulled the cord with all my might. She never spoke nor groaned, but immediately sprang upon her feet. But the attack was so sudden, she appeared not to have the power so much as to lift her hands to neck. I held her myself a few seconds, but the appearance of her face shocked me and my arms began to ache. I called Ann Kennett, and she came out of the cupboard. I desired her to come and assist me, which God knows she did, by taking hold of each end of the rope with me, and she held the rope with me until the poor girl dropped on the stairs. And her head struck against the edge of one of the steps, and her nose sprang a-bleeding. We held her there until we judged that she was dead, and then Ann Kennett let go of the cord. I made an attempt to dig a hole that night, but found it too dark. We put just the box under some bushes near the spot, and also the pickaxe and shovel. We then took the wheelbarrow home. We went down again the morning as soon as it was light, and I dug a hole with the intent to bury box and all, but I found that would take up too much of my time because of the roots and trees. I took the body out and threw it into the hole. I heaved the body up, then broke the box up and hid away the pick and shovel. John's body, after being hanged, was then on display just like Celia's has been to see at a price, and he had now implicated Anne in the murder, yet she was continuing to deny it, saying that he was a liar and a deceitful wretch, and she was then arrested for concealing and harboring but she was acquitted once again. Now you may be thinking that was only one murder. However, the next one would occur 100 years later, still in Brighton, but in 1934. And this would happen at a train station where a trunk had been left, and it began to smell really badly after a few weeks. However, nobody wanted to open it or mess with it in case someone came back for it. Now on June 17th, an employee finally decided to look inside, and according to the Mens Rea podcast, what they found was paper bags, one of which contained a torso of a woman and the other contained hands. No other body parts were found inside. However, train stations all over were told to look out for certain trunks to see if they could locate the rest of her body. A day later, this is exactly what would happen at King's Cross railway station in London. They would find a trunk, and inside were legs wrapped in this paper bag. However, the rest of her was still missing, including her head. But there was a word on one of these papers that were wrapped up on the legs, and it said Ford. However, then a woman called into the police saying that she believed that that was her handwriting. She had just sent a bag back to a sweets factory and she had written Ford on it, and she believed that this was from her, but she had no idea how it got in this trunk at this train station. And so the police called this sweets factory, and they said that they in fact do reuse certain papers to send out to other customers. So it really could not be tracked as to where this package with this certain paper went. The coroner found that this woman was 25 years old, standing at 5'2", and was 5 months pregnant. She would also be known to the public as the girl with pretty feet, or just pretty feet, because she was thought to have very well taken care of feet, which was almost like it could be dancers. However, her cause of death nor her identity could be confirmed. They did have a suspect, however, who was a local abortionist named Messiah, and later he would move to London, where a woman would actually die while he was performing an abortion, and nothing came of that case. He was never charged with anything, and it was speculated that he could have done the same to this unknown, unidentified woman. Messiah had decided to dismember her, put her in a trunk, and leave her at a train station so she couldn't be tracked back to him. Now, 700 people were questioned in this case, and no suspects were ever found other than Messiah, who no one ever did anything about. But this wouldn't be the last trunk murder that Brighton would see, because they were out searching for other trunks to find the missing pieces of this woman to get her identified. And on July 15th, they would be out on Kent Street when they would find a black leather trunk in an apartment. And inside, they did find a body. However, it was the full body of 42-year-old Violet K. Her cause of death was said to be a blow to the head, and she was a sex worker and dancer who had moved from London to Brighton with her boyfriend, Tony Mancini, and he worked at a restaurant named Skylark Cafe, and on May 10th, 2 months prior to finding her body, she had last been seen in this restaurant having an argument with Tony. Violet was drunk at this time and accused Tony of flirting with a young waitress, and this would be the last time anyone would see her. Now, Tony would come back in to work and told everyone that she had gone off to Paris and that they could have any of the belongings that she left behind. Her sister-in-law had gotten a telegram saying, "Going abroad, good job, sail Sunday, will write, V." And after this, Tony moved to this new place on Kent Street and took the trunk with him, often using it as a coffee table, with her body inside. When police found Violet, Tony was already on the run, and they actually had to search for him, and they found him in southeast London, and his trial lasted 5 days in December of 1934. Now, the telegram to Violet's sister was used as evidence because it was written in all caps, and it also matched the handwriting that Tony had used to make the menus at this restaurant he worked at. Now, many other witnesses came forward saying that Tony had either asked them to provide a false alibi or he had bragged about killing Violet. Tony was claiming that one of her clients killed her. He came home, saw her deceased, and panicked and threw her in this trunk. Now, there were several pieces of clothing that had blood found on them at his apartment. However, because Violet was so badly decomposed already, they couldn't match the blood to her. This jury would then deliberate for 2 hours before finding him not guilty, which would be a huge mistake because 2 years later, Tony would change his name and then confess. He was talking to a News of the World journalist when Tony admitted that the two were having a fight the night that Violet died, and she had begun to attack him with a hammer that he often used to break the coal for their fire. Tony wrestled the hammer from her, and then she demanded that he give it back, and this is the point where he threw the hammer at her and it struck her left temple. However, he had already been found not guilty on the charge of her murder. It's been speculated that Tony could have also had something to do with the murder of the girl with pretty feet. However, Violet was not dismembered and the girl with pretty feet was. Brighton was known for many years as the Queen of Slaughtering Places, which is a play on the Queen of Watering Places, and I'm sure that there are so many more trunk murders that occurred during this time. I just felt like these two were so strange because they happened almost 100 years apart exactly, and they were so extremely similar. And we've also talked on this channel about that happening before, and I'll link that video below because it's so extremely interesting. I mean, that was just crazy, down to the victim, down to the killer. Everything was similar in those cases, but it has me wondering if this is something that happens in the world, if it really is just a cycle that repeats itself. And in that case, I hope it doesn't continue to happen every 100 years. I hope you are enjoying ODDtober so far. It makes me so happy that you guys are so invested in this series because I'm having the time of my life filming it. And I was going to ask you if you have any questions for me that you want me to answer in a Q&A. I might go ahead and post one this month just as a little bonus video. So leave any questions you have down below for me, and don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.